Cyberpunk 2077 was a disappointment. I'll be the first to admit it. In the 80 or so hours I spent playing the game, finishing side quests, and even trudging through all the repetitive odd jobs around Night City, just so I could satisfy my need to reach 100% completion, I came across countless bugs, crashes, wonky AI, and broken quests, just to name a few. And all of those surface level problems did a great job of masking what was really wrong with the game underneath. But despite all of its problems, I still genuinely enjoyed my time with the game, and for better or worse, it's an experience that's going to stick with me and influence my perception of similar games I play for the foreseeable future. That said, there was another game I compared Cyberpunk to constantly during my playthrough, and it wasn't the Witcher series or Fallout or anything else you might expect. This is going to be a long video, so before we get started, I'm going to give you a chance to get up, grab a snack, a drink, take a shower, jerk off, or whatever else you need to do before you get comfortable and listen to an anime character talk about his favorite games for an indeterminate amount of time. You ready? Alright, let's get started. Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines released 13 years ago, to mixed reactions. Universally deemed a buggy, unfinished mess which lacked features and content that should have been there, and gameplay that was passable but nothing to write home about, and combat that left much to be desired, making it abundantly clear that a lot more time should have gone into finishing the game. Remind you of anything? Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, or Vampire, as I'll be calling it from here on out, is a game that, despite all of its flaws, had a lot to offer that games of today just don't. And that really could have made Cyberpunk 2077 the game that we had all hoped it would be. Cyberpunk may be a lost cause as of now, but it did a lot of things right that have been overlooked. So what could it have possibly taken from a 13-year-old game to turn it into the masterpiece it should have been? To answer that question, we'll first have to look at what made Vampire so special to begin with. Vampire was split into two major areas of gameplay. The hubs, where you could meet new people around the city, purchase weapons and blood, dance at the club, let the Malkavian psycho co-owner Jeanette completely seduce you even though you're a vampire who doesn't feel any sexual attraction or desire towards other beings because you just don't reproduce like humans do, but god damn those big, juicy... or, you know, other hub stuff. Then you also had the big set pieces, areas that you only visit under specific circumstances that give you the option to either sneak, talk, or force your way through. Unfortunately, it often came down to the latter, but we'll get to that later. The best of these set pieces can be seen in the Ocean House, one of the first areas you'll come across during your playthrough of Vampire. You're given very little information about this location before going in, other than you're supposed to bring back a possession of a spirit that supposedly inhabits it. This area is an experience of itself, so I'll try to reveal as little as possible about it in case you want to decide to play the game for yourself, which I highly recommend you do. But the gameplay in this area is completely different from what you've been doing so far. It guides you through the story of this spirit by letting you see and find things for yourself to piece together why the spirit can't move on from this mansion. There is no combat, no sneaking around, no direct conversations. It almost completely changes the genre of the game from an RPG to a psychological horror for just a few minutes, and it does it so well. On top of that, it doesn't explicitly tell you anything that's going on with this spirit. It doesn't give you dialogue that's saying, this is why I'm here, this is what I want, this is how to stop me. It makes you find all those things for yourself by exploring. If you don't want to play it yourself, let me know if you'd like to see me play through Vampire here on my channel, whether through live stream or a video series, so you can really see what I'm talking about, because god damn, this game is so good. Vampire was strongest in its hub areas. They did a great job of building atmosphere with a great soundtrack, eerie sound design, dark alleyways with the occasional lone hooker or homeless person or businessman taking a phone call, giving you the perfect opportunity to fill your constant need for blood. The streets were lit up and populated, or at least as populated as a game from 2004 could manage, and the cities really felt lived in. It would have made for great horror atmosphere if you yourself weren't the monster that you would otherwise fear. And believe me, this game does a really great job of making you really feel like a vampire in the modern world. Quests in these areas always had multiple ways to complete them depending on your character's skill set, how you approach problems. For instance, towards the beginning of the game, you're tasked with getting painkillers for a man named Mercurio. This is all the information it gives you, so you'll naturally go to the hospital. You're stopped outside by a man who immediately recognizes you as a vampire and explains to you that he's a ghoul, a human who is given vampire blood and gains a portion of the vampire's power. After dismissing the ghoul, you head inside. They seem to be busy, and the lady at the counter asks you to wait your turn to be seen. However, you've raised your persuasion, so you're able to make something up to get her to let you in the back, which she does. Now you just need to find a bottle of pills, right? You walk down the hall and hear a girl calling out in pain. As you look into a room to your left, a red-haired girl, bleeding out in the hospital bed, begs you to get a doctor. Thinking it might gain you some humanity, you look for a doctor. You find him in a room close by, tending to another patient. He kindly tells you to fuck off, and you're forced to decide either to ignore the girl dying in the next room or offer a bit of your blood to help her in hopes it might save her the cost of turning her into a ghoul. After making your decision, you go back to searching. You don't find what you're looking for in any of the hospital rooms, so you head further back to find a locked office. You're able to lockpick your way into the room and find a computer that you're able to hack into. Reading some of the emails, you find that you may be able to find the pills you're looking for in another office, Dr. Malcolm's. Unfortunately, you can't pick your way into this one. You make your way to the second floor and find a kitchen. Inside is a note containing the password to Dr. Malcolm's computer. You figure it may come in handy, so you take note of it. After leaving the kitchen, you're stopped by a security guard who tells you to leave. Using your unique persuasion techniques, you're able to make him believe you're supposed to be there, and even get him to give you his keys. The keys open up a room with a single computer and a vent above a counter. You figure you could probably get into there, so you try. After a few tries, you manage to squeeze your way in. You follow the vents and eventually drop into a storage room where you find a key to Dr. Malcolm's office atop some boxes. You make your way over to the office and find the pills you're looking for next to his computer. You remember that you found his password, so you log on to his computer. There's not much to look at other than the doctor's emails, but you've gotten this far, so you might as well take a look. You find out the married doctor has been having an affair with a woman named Paige. You already know there's only one doctor here right now, so you have an idea. You approach the doctor from earlier, who again tries to dismiss you, but you mention the name Paige and he begins to listen. You blackmail him into giving you some money. After all, it's $75 when his marriage is at stake. This is only one quest, and only one method of finishing it. Maybe you're able to pick the lock on Dr. Malcolm's door right away and never go upstairs to find the password to his computer, and therefore never find out about his affair. Maybe you decide to leave the girl to die instead of making her your ghoul. Every single quest in the game is like this. There's never just one way to do something. The game's characters always felt like real people, and you always feel like what you say or do can have drastic effects on how you're viewed by them. Whether you're a friend or an enemy, and later on your words hold lives on the line. Your choices and actions have a very real impact on the world and characters around you beyond just checking off another quest. And there will be times where you'll say something that you may see as completely harmless, but the repercussions will turn an entire faction against you. You're not a god in this world, you're not even a high-ranking vampire. You start at the very bottom of vampire society and are forced to follow the orders of others to try to work your way up to being someone who's taken seriously. And even then, the story will go on with or without you. You're just a single pawn on the chessboard that is Vampire's LA, a city that itself has very minor significance on the greater world of darkness that lies beyond. It's because of this you feel so much more connected to the people of the city. They all have their own goals they'll pursue regardless whether you help them or not, and at the end of the day, every other vampire, friend or foe, needs to be handled with caution because there'll come a time when they'll be your competition in trying to move up in the world, if you ever make it that far. The world feels connected in a way that you never feel like you're done with an area or character until the credits roll. The hub areas are unlocked one at a time, but you can't just finish all the side quests in Santa Monica and then move on to downtown and never return. The game always has you traveling back and forth between these hub areas because just because you've progressed in the story and moved on to the next area doesn't mean all the people you've met and relationships you've formed are going to follow you or just be forgotten for the rest of the game. Characters will send you emails days after you've finished quests for them, either asking you for favors or just sending you a thoughtful poem and reminding you that you have their gratitude. Looking at you, Vivi. And I haven't even mentioned yet that the clan you choose when you create a character can completely change your entire playthrough. They all have different abilities that can open up new options for almost every encounter and give you benefits and flaws that you have to work around. For instance, Malkavians see the world completely differently from every other race, and that's reflected in every single line of the game. I mean, think about that for a second. Every single line of the game was rewritten for Malkavians. A clan that, frankly, most people won't even choose unless somebody told them about that. And it makes dialogue intentionally confusing because the minds of Malkavians are just so hyperactive to where they're not crazy, but they're just different in a way that is very, very hard to understand. You have to decipher every line before you respond because words have hidden meanings and sometimes your mind goes completely off track and you're not even having the same conversation as the person you're talking to. It creates an entire new challenge that I don't think any other game has done before or since. And then you have the Nosferatu, whose bodies and faces are so disformed that some characters will completely refuse to talk to you, some will pass out from shock upon seeing you. Almost everyone will treat you differently, and you can't be seen in public or it's an immediate violation of the Masquerade, which is something you always have to keep in mind no matter what character you're playing, because the more you violate the Masquerade, the more vampire hunters will come after you, and if you do it too many times, you'll literally be executed by vampire society. And on top of that, there's also humanity that you have to keep an eye on. It may be better for you as a vampire to drink the blood of a beggar asking you for spare change, but you throw away a bit of your humanity every time you make a decision as a vampire rather than as a person. And the lower your humanity gets, the higher chance that you'll go berserk and lose control of yourself, literally losing all control of your character, often resulting in a violation of the Masquerade. My point with all this, Vampire does an amazing job with choice and consequence, arguably the most vital part of any RPG. This is, unfortunately, an area where Cyberpunk failed miserably. Your actions never really felt like they meant anything outside of whatever quests you were doing, and dialogue options rarely had any impact outside maybe a line from the opposing character in response. And your life path changed absolutely nothing about the game outside the first 15 minutes of gameplay. I mean, sure, you had the occasional extra dialogue option here or there depending on your life path, but like I said, those dialogue options have absolutely no effect on the story 99% of the time. And on that topic, let's talk about voice acting. I'm of the opinion that the voice acting in Cyberpunk is one of its strongest points. No character really feels out of place, no lines stuck out to me as bad, and while fodder enemies tend to share voices, that's kind of to be expected in a game like this. I know there's been some mixed opinions about Keanu Reeves' performance as Johnny Silverhand, but I absolutely loved him in the role, and I feel like he really brought the character to life. The only voices I wasn't crazy about were V's, male and female. Whether the player character of a game like this should have a voice speaking out every line you say has always kind of been something I struggle to come to a conclusion on. There are times when that voice dialogue can add a lot to the moment and help bring you into the story, but it also creates so many problems as a player. I mean, imagine you create a character with a personality and motivations and even a voice in mind, and then they start speaking in game and you realize you don't have a say in the character that you're playing. Everything that you did, all the customization you did, beginning, all the planning, doesn't matter. Because the character you're playing is who the developers thought you should play. And this means dialogue options will come out differently than you intended. The voice doesn't suit the character you created. There are some cases where this works, and I can't really say for sure whether it hurts or helps Cyberpunk in reality, but as someone who really likes to roleplay my own character and even speak my own lines, it gets distracting and tends to kind of take me out of the experience. I mean, it's an interesting conversation to have that affects the current RPG industry as a whole, not just Cyberpunk, so comment how you feel about it. I'd love to hear more opinions. Now, while there are so many criticisms to be brought up about the role-playing elements of Cyberpunk, there is one thing it does exceptionally well. And it's something that very few games can actually accomplish, or even try to for that matter. The game is beautiful, and I don't just mean the graphics. Night City is breathtaking as a set piece. You can stop at literally any point in the game, turn your HUD off and take a screenshot, and it wouldn't look out of place as your wallpaper. But even more than that, the game does so well in creating moments in the story where you're just completely sucked in and immersed in the world around you. Where the ambience, the music, the backdrop, the lighting, the characters, the voice acting, everything just comes together perfectly. And for a moment, you just have to stop and take it all in. It's moments like these, sprinkled throughout the game, that are why I can look back on my time with this game fondly. The story carries you along through these moments, whether it's the main quest line or the side quests, where I think it's done the best, to bring what is otherwise a decent story to be something more than the sum of its parts, and something truly memorable as a gaming experience. I want you to close your eyes for a moment and imagine you're walking into a dimly lit production studio to find a cross spotlit by a purple light in the middle. The producer approaches you as you enter, but you zone her out as your mind is too preoccupied with a reformed criminal asking you to be the one to nail him onto that cross for his final moments because you showed just a little bit of compassion and faith in him, so that he could serve his death sentence as a martyr for his newfound faith in God. You approach the cross, the man already lying on it, for you to drive nail by nail through his right hand, then his left, then his right foot, and finally his left foot. He cries out in pain but urges you to finish it. You raise the cross for the cameras to see and then stand back, watching this man give a final sermon with his dying breath, broadcast to the entire world because that was his final wish, before the lights fade out. You're left in a moment of silence to contemplate what just happened, walking back out of the studio the way you came, past the parking lot to find a crowd of people who supported the man you just watched die, protesting his death sentence, but you knew it was too late already. It's something that sticks with you to the point where I can remember every single detail months after the fact when I haven't even seen it again since. And that's just a single example from a minor side quest, completely disconnected from the main story. It's so easy to completely skip. It's moments like these that are something really special, that I don't really see other people talking about, and it's where I see the most potential in Cyberpunk. And while combat isn't the best, it works, and it's enjoyable enough that I don't find myself bored or irritated with it. And there are often ways to avoid it altogether if that's the way you want to play. Cyberpunk is fairly consistent with giving you both a stealth and a loud option to approach every encounter, all the way to the end. Unfortunately, to the point where it kind of gets predictable and repetitive, with a few exceptions like boss fights or cyber psychos where your only options are violent or slightly less violent. And the end of the game, starting from the point of no return, is one of the biggest highlights, as it's one of the few parts where you have real choice that has actual effects on the story depending on your option for how to approach it. It may offer a different style of gameplay to spice things up a bit and keep you engaged. And while I haven't seen every single ending, the ones I did play through were satisfying and didn't leave me disappointed. Now that we've discussed the best parts of both games, I need to take some time to crack down on some flaws. As I've already pointed out a lot of what's wrong with Cyberpunk, and you've probably heard all about it and more from your own experiences, reviews, and other videos on the subject, I'm gonna cut the game some slack and focus on Vampire. As I mentioned before, Vampire had a very rough release. In fact, even today, the base game is basically unplayable without a fan patch, which is even included in the GOG version of the game today. Aside from countless bugs on par or even worse than Cyberpunk, the game was missing a ton of content. The unofficial patch has been in progress constantly for the past 13 years solely because of just how many things were wrong with Vampire on the release. That in mind, I'm going to be critiquing Vampire based on the unofficial patch and the optional plus patch that restores content. This is objectively the best version of the game to play that stays as close as possible to vanilla. While this version does iron out a lot of the flaws of the original game and brings it closer to the original vision Troika first had, it's still far from perfect. Voice acting is great for the most part, but audio quality is so inconsistent between characters. There are some characters whose lines sound like they were recorded in a professional sound booth, and others who sound like they were recorded off a shitty MP3 player that had been dropped a few too many times and then thrown into a lake for good measure. And even when it does sound good, sometimes it'll just get so quiet where you can barely even hear the voice over the sound of the wind in the background for no apparent reason. Stealth can be great at certain points, but there are some times where you can sneak 2 feet in front of a museum guard and you won't have any clue you're there. And other times where you'll be seen from around the corner on the other side of a wall. And the only reason you just don't give up stealth entirely and murder your way through is because you'll lose humanity, which it can be extremely frustrating at certain points. But probably the worst part of the game is the combat. Melee combat has you flailing around like a maniac and spamming your skills until you win, and ranged combat is completely useless unless you put all of your points into it, because whether you hit your target or not is completely up to chance, and even on the rare occasion where you do hit, it'll do next to no damage until you get one of the endgame guns and raise your skills. Now, this wouldn't be such a big deal because you can almost always avoid combat. Until you can't. While most of the areas in the game give you multiple ways to approach every situation, and plenty of ways to avoid combat, that all kind of falls apart towards the end of the game. You can tell Troika was running out of time and budget because you get to a point where you just go from area to area where your only option is combat with few breathers in between. I almost wish I could skip every combat area starting with the mansion. Let's not even talk about the sewer level that was so bad, so repetitive and boring and drawn out and filled with meaningless mobs just for the sake of padding out time, that the unofficial patch added a way to skip almost the entire area because nothing could be done to salvage it. There are a few highlights, like sneaking your way through Santa Monica or the final taxi ride before the last level, but overall, the last third or so was the worst part of the game, and there's not much that could be done to save it. If you've made it this far, you may have noticed a pattern. Vampire excels at almost all of the things that Cyberpunk gets wrong. And Cyberpunk's strengths lie in a gap that could elevate Vampire to being so much more than a cult classic. So what kind of game would we get if a developer took the choice and consequence, the meaningful dialogue, world building, and connectivity of the world of Vampire, and combined it with Cyberpunk's storytelling, graphical fidelity, breathtaking moments, really took their time with it to iron out any major bugs, designed a combat and progression system that was unique and, more importantly, enjoyable, with fun weapons that stood out from one another, and turned it into something entirely new. The hopeful side of me wants to believe the game I'm imagining is Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2. But considering how Cyberpunk turned out and how the development of that game has gone so far, with it not even having a developer anymore as of writing this, the reality is that's probably not gonna happen. At the end of the day, I can only hope that someone who has the ability to make the game we all wanted Cyberpunk 2077 to be will see this video, and maybe, just maybe, an idea will have sparked from it and the seeds will have been sown for something greater. Maybe 7 years down the line, we'll be able to look at Cyberpunk, not as a disappointing, overhyped failure, but as a cult classic that paved the way for something new. Something that we looked forward to for years and that lived up to all of our expectations. Something that became the game that Cyberpunk 2077 should have been.